It happened on a Tuesday under the clear, unforgiving blue of the eastern California sky. To the naked eye, the morning of the event looked exactly like the one before it. The Sierra Nevada mountains stood silent, casting their long shadows over the dry valleys. But deep beneath the scrub brush and the dust, the earth was preparing to break a silence that had held for centuries. The shift did not begin with a roar that could be heard by human ears. It began as a ghost in the machine. At exactly 9:43 in the morning, seismic station CY1124, a lonely outpost situated just east of the Sierra foothills, captured a signal that defied every geological precedent on record. For generations, the story of California's instability has been defined by the slow creep. It is a steady, almost imperceptible drift, a tectonic grinding usually measured in mere millimeters per year. It is the kind of movement that takes a lifetime to notice. But the data that flooded the servers of the California Integrated Seismic Network that morning told a terrifyingly different story. The ground was no longer drifting, it was lurching. The digital needles on the monitors didn't just wiggle, they spiked. The instruments recorded lateral movement not in millimeters, but in centimeters, occurring at a velocity that suggested the Earth itself had slammed on the accelerator. In the blink of an eye, the rules of engagement between the Pacific and North American plates had changed. Chapter 1: The Initial Rupture. When analysts first looked at the raw data, they saw what they called a wall of motion. This did not look like the rolling, rhythmic waves of a distant earthquake, nor did it match the familiar, jagged signatures of the San Andreas fault system. This was a sudden, violent displacement, a vertical spike of energy followed immediately by a chaotic string of irregular aftershocks. Automated algorithms immediately flagged the event as a critical anomaly, but the human analysts were baffled. The waveform didn't match the fingerprints of the Hayward, the Calaveras, or any of the known restless giants of the coast. This was a burst of raw kinetic energy emanating from deep within the crust, in a region that the hazard maps had painted as relatively quiet. By mid-morning, the theoretical data on the screens transformed into a physical reality. Dr. Lane Anomaly, a veteran field geologist, led a convoy of dust-covered trucks to the coordinates flagged by the sensors. Stepping out into the heat of the valley, what she found shattered the illusion of stability. A fresh, jagged scar sliced across the valley floor. The rupture stretched for nearly 2 meters, tearing through the dry grass and hard-packed soil. In some sections, the earth had physically pulled apart, leaving gaping maws more than a foot wide. The violence of the shift was frozen in the landscape. Old fence posts were split at the base, leaning at drunken, impossible angles. A nearby farm road had buckled upward, creating a sharp asphalt ridge that had stopped a pickup truck dead in its tracks. Dr. Morales and her team used laser rangefinders to measure the displacement. The reading was chilling, a widening of 37 centimeters. In the world of geology, where stress usually accumulates over centuries, this wasn't just a movement, it was a massive leap. Chapter 2: Evidence from the Deep. As the field teams worked under the sun to map the surface scars, a much more disturbing narrative was emerging inside the climate-controlled stillness of the laboratory. Dr. Reena Patel had received the first rush of rock samples collected from the rupture zone. She placed the thin sections under the polarizing microscope, expecting to see the standard sedimentary mix of the valley floor. Instead, she found the chemical signature of a nightmare. Glowing under the cross-polarized light, Dr. Patel identified crystals of Coesite. Coesite is not a rock you find in a garden. It is a high-pressure polymorph of quartz, a mineral that is forged only in the crushing depths of the earth at least 20 kilometers down. Alongside it, she found traces of myelinite, a rock fabric created by intense, hot shearing deep underground. The implications of this discovery were profound and terrifying. These minerals were time-stamped signatures of deep crust deformation. Their presence on the surface meant that the crack in the valley wasn't just a shallow fissure or a localized landslide. It suggested a through-going rupture, a direct vein connecting the surface of California to the deep tectonic engines grinding between the Pacific and North American plates. The Earth hadn't just cracked, it had opened a window into the deep crust in a single geologic instant. Chapter 3: The Community on the Edge. While scientists peered into microscopes and debated mineralogy, the residents of Eastern California were confronting the damage in real time. On the corner of Willow Avenue and East Ridge Road, the abstract concept of tectonic shift had become a domestic crisis. Residents like Teresa, a lifelong local, and Gwen, a community leader, gathered on the streets. They reported that the changes were not a one-time event, they were daily and escalating. Gwen pointed to fresh fissures running like spiderwebs through her driveway. "We have lived here for 20 years, she told reporters, her voice trembling. "The ground has never moved like this." The damage was insidious because it was slow and silent. Sidewalks on Maple Street had lifted 3 inches, severing the roots of ancient trees and splitting concrete slabs. Front doors refused to close as door frames warped. At night, residents reported lying awake, listening to strange groans echoing from the wooden frames of their houses as the foundations settled into the shifting soil. The crisis reached the institutional level when the local school district made the difficult decision to close the east wing of Jefferson Elementary. Stress fractures had compromised the support columns of the gymnasium. For these families, the anomaly was no longer a scientific curiosity, it was a daily threat to their safety, their homes, and their financial futures. Chapter 4: The Infrastructure Trap. Beyond the neighborhoods, a silent, invisible crisis was brewing along the state's critical arteries. Eastern California is a corridor for survival. Interstate 80, the massive California aqueduct, and a complex web of high-pressure natural gas pipelines all traverse this unstable ground. The transcript of the event highlights a terrifying bureaucratic reality. A 2025 audit had already flagged a significant backlog of inspections for pipelines in the Walker Lane zone. Some maintenance delays exceeded 18 months. Now, with the ground moving beneath them, officials were facing a daunting calculus. The risk here is what experts call cascading failure. If the ground shifts even a few centimeters more, a buried high-pressure gas line could shear and explode. Simultaneously, the aqueduct could buckle, cutting off water supplies. A rupture in one system could trigger a chain reaction: fires from gas leaks, flooding from water mains, and the severance of power and fiber optic cables. Such an event would effectively isolate entire communities and sever the logistical lifeline between Reno and Sacramento. Engineers began a frantic triage, rushing to prioritize inspections, not based on the calendar, but on the terrifying new reality of the shifting ground. They were racing to find the weak points before the Earth found them first. Chapter 5: The Scientific Deadlock. Inside the university conference rooms, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The data had sparked a heated debate regarding the future of California's geography, pitting 2 leading theories against one another. On one side stood Dr. Samuel Lee, a specialist in tectonic modeling. For Lee, the event was the smoking gun for a long-held controversial hypothesis known as the Walker Lane theory. He argued that the plate boundary is migrating eastward. He posited that the famous San Andreas fault is slowly dying, and that the Walker Lane shear zone, where this rupture occurred, is the future boundary of the tectonic plates. He pointed to paleo-seismic records and the massive 1872 Owens Valley earthquake as evidence. To Lee, the deep crust samples were proof that the process of tearing California apart was accelerating. Across the table sat Dr. Maria Contreras, an expert in seismic hazards. She urged caution and restraint. She highlighted the sparse instrumentation of the eastern valleys, warning that atmospheric noise or equipment drift could mimic tectonic signals. She argued passionately that without peer-reviewed confirmation and denser GPS arrays, issuing sweeping evacuation orders would be irresponsible. Actionable decisions depend on more than just tectonic models, she warned. She feared that panic, driven by unverified data, could do more harm to the population than the geological threat itself. It was a clash between theoretical foresight and pragmatic caution. Lee saw the start of a new geological era. Contreras saw a need for reproducible data before upending the economy and displacing millions of people. Chapter 6: The Response. With no scientific consensus to guide them, emergency managers were forced to act on uncertainty. A coordinated checklist was activated to translate the unknown into action. The response was swift. The first step was surveillance expansion. Within hours, teams were deploying portable seismographs, GPS receivers, and INSAR ground stations to fill the gaps in the Walker Lane network. The goal was to build a high-resolution, real-time map of how stress was distributing across the valley. Simultaneously, infrastructure triage began. Highway engineers were dispatched to Interstate 80 to inspect bridge expansion joints, the critical weak points that could fail during a ground shift. Utility crews began emergency surveys of electrical substations and pipelines, rewriting their maintenance schedules to prioritize the fault zone. Finally, public mobilization was enacted. Emergency templates were updated, and drills were scheduled. Residents were instructed to secure heavy furniture and review their evacuation routes. The California Office of Emergency Services coordinated with FEMA to ensure that early warning systems were integrated with local sirens and text alerts. The state was preparing for war against an enemy they couldn't see. Conclusion: The unsettled Earth. As the sun sets over the Sierra foothills, the story concludes with a sobering realization. The checklists, the drills, the sensors, and the debates are vital, but they are not guarantees. They are merely a framework for action in a landscape that has become an unpredictable variable. The event at station CY1124 serves as a stark reminder of our fragility. While science moves at the measured speed of peer review and consensus, nature operates on its own violent timeline. The discovery of deep earth minerals on the surface of a California valley suggests that the ground beneath the world's fifth largest economy is not as settled as we hope. As the debate between Dr. Lee and Dr. Contreras continues in the halls of academia, the cracks on Willow Avenue continue to widen. The sensors hum in the darkness, waiting for the next spike. The question remains, hanging over the state like a storm cloud. Is this a momentary tremor, or is it the first fracture in the splitting of a state? Science is watching, but the Earth is moving.